Has the next priority question.
Thanks, Les Corla. I'm asking the Minister to make a statement about Operation Mizen. Operation Mizen was reported in the Daily Mail as a surveillance operation against anti-water charges protesters. We have asked a number of questions about it. The answers we've gotten have been more interesting for what they haven't said than what they have said. The Minister has denied that this is a surveillance operation, but she hasn't ever, and I'd ask her to rule out, to state clearly whether anti-water charges protesters have been or currently under surveillance by Operation Mizen or another arm of the Gardaí.
Minister.
Deputy, as I've indicated to the House previously, and I'm happy to confirm again today, Operation Mizen is not a surveillance programme operated by An Garda Síochána, contrary to any assertions that may be made either by yourself or others in commentary on water protests. I have been informed by the Garda Commissioner that Operation Mizen was established by An Garda Síochána as a national coordination office to provide appropriate policing responses to maintain public order and to ensure public safety of all involved in protests against water charges. In this context, one approach which the Gardaí authorities adopt is to make use of open source information. Open source information is generally and publicly available on the internet, as you know, and social media platforms, not just to the Gardaí, but to anyone, everywhere. I'm further informed that Operation Mizen does not engage in technical surveillance or interception, and I can confirm further that no public representative or member of the public is subject to such surveillance by Operation Mizen.
Margaret. Paul Murphy.
Thanks a lot, Minister. I mean, that's word for word pretty much the answer you gave my colleague Deputy Higgins a couple of weeks ago. It may be true, but what's interesting is what is not included in the answer. So can I ask the Minister to clarify, in this context, one of the approaches adopted, is the formulation used previously, this time you said one approach, involves making use of open source information. What other approaches are used by the Gardaí to monitor protesters? And secondly, I note you say, I'm further informed that no public representative or member of the public is subject to such surveillance by Operation Mizen, which refers to technical or interception surveillance. Well, is any member of the public or public representative subject to another form of surveillance? The only thing that's ruled out there is technical surveillance. Are there other forms of surveillance used, for example, the monitoring of people's whereabouts, etc., which people would come under?
Margaret, Minister.
Well, I would emphasise to you that your characterisation, the characterisation of Operation Mizen as a surveillance operation is simply wrong. That's what I've said. It was set up by the Gardaí to support national coordination of their management of water protests from a public order perspective, and while there have been many lawful and peaceful protests against water charges, there have also been some very unfortunate examples of unacceptable violent protests, including outside the gates of these houses. And of course, the fact is that the Gardaí must take whatever appropriate measures they consider necessary to facilitate those who want to protest peacefully and to ensure public safety where needed. As I said, the Garda Commissioner has made it clear to me that no public representative or member of the public is subject to technical or lawful interception by Operation Mizen. I'm sure you'd agree with me that it's essential that people obey the law and demonstrate peacefully, whatever the issue at hand may be. There's no question but that the right to protest is a fundamental one in any democracy, which we must protect and facilitate. However, that right must be exercised peacefully. And obviously the function of the Garda Síochána is to make sure, in respect of public protests and demonstrations, they have to facilitate them taking place in a peaceful way and orderly way, and without undue disruption to the daily lives and businesses of others.
Thank you. Deputy Paul Murphy.
Thanks, Les Corla. I mean, my questions were very, very clear, Minister. So why are you refusing to answer what are extremely simple questions, which are begged by the answers that you've given now on 3 occasions? So are members of the public or public representatives subject to any form of surveillance by Operation Mizen or the Gardaí as a result of participating in anti-water charges protesters? When you refer to one of the approaches involved making use of open source information, what other approaches are used by the Gardaí to gain information on anti-water charges protesters? I mean, simply, it goes back to the story originally in the Mail, which refers to 6 months monitoring the protesters, compiling profiles, gathering intelligence on their whereabouts, according to sources. Just simply, is this taking place? are protesters subject to surveillance other than lawful interception, which is denied by the Minister, as a result of being protesters? And if it is the case, or if she's simply refusing to answer, if the Minister is refusing to answer that question, is that not extremely sinister that people will be targeted for surveillance with taxpayers' resources by the Gardaí as a result of participating in protests?
Minister, to conclude.
Well, what I would say to you is that the Gardaí are there to keep the peace. They carry out their normal activities as on Garda Síochána in this country in order to ensure that the protests are peaceful. I would point out to you that a total of 188 arrests have been made since November 2014 in relation to water charge protests, and I would point out to you that within that number some individuals have been the subject of arrest on multiple occasions. So the majority of arrests made relate to public order offences and breaches of Section 12 of the Water Services Act, although there have been arrests for more serious offences. So obviously what the Gardaí do in relation to ensuring that you can have peaceful protests, they go about their business as members of An Garda Síochána, and they deal with the situation as it arises and take the appropriate action in dealing with the situations where, in fact, as I say, since November 2014, 188 arrests have had to be made in relation to peaceful protests. So An Garda Síochána, to answer your question, go about their normal business of keeping the peace in relation to whether it's water protests or other situations, and quite clearly they have not been peaceful protests in certain areas because 188 arrests have been made.